Sowmya Parthasarathy leads Arup's master planning and urban design team in London. She's a mayor's design advocate and sits on the London Design Review Panel and review panels for Transport for London and the OPDC, the Old Oak Park Royal Development Corporation. So Sowmya, there's lots of thinking, a lot of discussions, a lot of debates about the shape of the post-COVID city, flight from the centre, 15-minute cities, boost for the suburbs, all that sort of thing. How do you respond at a time when things are still so uncertain?
Peter, you're quite right. I think at the moment, all of us are, you can say, in somewhat of a reactive mode. And that's completely understandable. As you know, Arup's working with MHCLG on the 100 Cities Towns Fund. And the message we're hearing from all these cities loud and clear is that economic recovery is absolutely critical. So it's quite understandable that some of the early investments and some of the early things that we're doing is around those kinds of things. And that will happen. But I think what's quite important is that we keep in mind that what COVID has offered us in terms of an opportunity, if one can say that, is a boost for certain principles of good urban design and planning that are absolutely fundamental. And so while we are in this reactive mode and doing things, we should keep in mind some of these larger principles. And my top three are: one is to rethink how we move around our cities and towns. And there's a lot of investment into cycle and active travels and active travel and walking in cities. And all of this is absolutely critical because I think at the end of the day, some of the trends you mentioned, the 15-minute cities boosted, it's all about being able to live your life and possibly go to work within a smaller radius. I mean, get rid of these huge commutes. So rethink how we move around our cities and aligning our land use to sort of match that. Number two, which is related, is how do we hang on to some of the benefits we've seen around carbon reduction and better air quality and the proliferation of wildlife in our cities that this period of lesser activity has brought. And in some ways that's related to the way we move. Transport contributes nearly 25 to 30% of carbon emissions in most of our cities, depending on where we are. And so if we can sort of crack that, I think we have some real wins in terms of climate change as well. And finally, I think what we've learned is that we really need to plan and design for a loose-fit city, both a loose-fit public realm and buildings, because today it's COVID, we might have a different kind of crisis later on. But how can we be agile and basically have an overlay to our cities to respond to some of these needs that are not normal, but come up from time to time. And it's interesting that we've just done a meanwhile use study for London, which is part of their overall resilience strategy. So at the end of the day, it comes down to resilience. Meanwhile use is just one way, it's temporary use. But how do we begin to use our cities in ways that they're designed for one thing today, but they can be used in many different ways depending on the needs. So to answer your question, we are in a reactive mode today, but I think we need to keep in mind that some of the things we do today will, I think, help us in the future as we move towards just good planning.
You've been working on the Wellcome Trust Genome Campus in Cambridge. Can you tell me more about that, about the impact you see of the knowledge economy on shaping London and the South East? Because I guess that is an area that has been one of the winners, you might say, coming out of COVID-19.
So the Wellcome Trust, as you may know, is the world's sort of largest and most influential medical charity. And the Wellcome Genome Campus, which is the Sanger Institute and the European Bioinformatics Center, is one of their biggest investments. It started way back in the early 90s, and a third of the human genome was actually decoded in that location. What they are now looking at is how do you grow a campus in that location in order to promote a world-class science ecosystem in that place. So how do you take what was originally discovery science primarily and add to it the other elements of the science ecosystem, which is the industry, academia, and then how do you do it in a way that um, that that helps the people who are making all this happen. So it's no longer the master plan that we did for Welcome, which achieved a resolution to grant consent in October of last year, has about 150,000 square meters of research space and commercial space, as you would expect, but it also has 1,500 homes, which will be used mainly for the staff of the campus. And I think this is a paradigm that a lot of sort of knowledge promoters are looking at. So we've been doing some work for Imperial College and their campus in White City works on similar principles, UCL in Stratford, and so on, where there are two things which places for the knowledge economy must have over and above excellent facilities, and that is a way to attract and keep your talent. And in places like the southeast of England, it basically means good housing and affordable quality of life, schooling for children, and all those kinds of things. And secondly, the means to achieve collaboration. I mean, all science, all universities and science organizations talk about that. No longer is innovation possible within the realms of individual subjects. It has to be interdisciplinary. And so more and more people are talking about, science clients are talking about placemaking and where people sort of collide with each other and collaborate and so on. So elements of placemaking, mix of uses which have to do with quality of life, all this is becoming really important and common to almost all science clients all across the world, really.
It's an important part of the economy of at least southeast of England. And if you look at the golden triangle of London, Cambridge and Oxford, that is a world leading agglomeration of knowledge economy. Don't you think we need a strategic plan for the southeast in order to be able to make that work properly, to attract the interest of the world in the way that it deserves?
Peter, I fully agree with that. I mean, I do think we have a strong national policy here in the UK. There's more and more interest in sort of local plans and a local approach. So I do think there's a gap in that strategic regional thinking about place, and I think that's essential. And if you look at some large cities around the world, similar to London, there are some very good examples of strategic regional thinking that has helped them. And I'll just give you two examples. One, of course, is New York. And there you have the Regional Plan Association, which isn't necessarily a statutory body, but it is a campaign and an advocacy organization that looks at the tri-state area around New York. And one can say they're quite influential in how policy is developed broadly in the area. The other example is Mumbai. And again, very similar to London, it's incredibly intense and a place where everybody wants to come. And it was, I think, way back in the 70s that they realized that they needed some kind of a strategic plan for the region around Mumbai. And so the New Bombay Corporation was founded, and a plan for nodal developments surrounding Mumbai was developed. In the early days, it was a centralized body that governed it, and now there are individual municipalities. What it helped was it helped target investment. It helped target a kind of an employment base and identity for the different nodes. And today there's a new international airport being planned for New Bombay. And I think it has had its problems, of course, but it has had a very good impact, I think, on the overall metropolitan region in Mumbai. So just looking at those two cities, Mumbai and New York, different models, but I think both very successful in arguing for a regional strategic approach for London.
Very good. And you are India's group leader at Arup. So what are the key issues facing India's cities at the moment, and how will they change, do you think, in the post-COVID environment?
Indian cities have a whole host of problems that have only been exacerbated by the current COVID crisis. And I think the two sort of major challenges that the cities are facing, particularly in this COVID context is the sheer density of most of Indian cities. And secondly, the movement of informal labor, not just within cities, but between cities. This has proved to be a huge challenge. And one of my fears is that that the solution to this will be seen in the proliferation of more understandably secure, gated kind of developments. And we are seeing more and more of that happening. But I think what COVID has also brought to the fore among a lot of people is an absolute demand for better quality of life, for better civic infrastructure, for better air quality, and so on. I think driven by that demand, we are going to see some improvements in Indian cities. And actually, if you see, there are plenty of wonderful examples all over Indian cities and towns that you can point to as models. But one of the challenges is it's very hard to scale them up, to replicate them, because that's really dependent on good governance. And I think there's some reform that's needed at the city level. I mean, a lot of there's too much top down in Indian cities and not enough bottom up, not enough city level funding and power to make these things happen. So I think we will see some improvements in that direction. I just wanted to point out one thing that we've done recently at Arup is we've signed a memorandum of understanding with a group called the Tata Trusts, which is a big NGO in India. But one of the things they do is they work with government to pilot certain projects. And so we're working with them on two areas. One is water in cities, and the other is data-driven governance. And they're working with, India has a 100 smart cities program as well. And the Tata Trust is working to see how to inject better governance within these cities. So I think lots of stuff happening. It's a very exciting time to be involved in India, and we'll see how it goes.
But you haven't mentioned movement through cities in India, which seems to be traffic is often one of the issues that really needs a solution.
It absolutely does. And I think the 22 very big cities in India at the moment building metro systems, for example. And when I grew up in Delhi, there was no metro system. And today, that's 25 years later, it has a highly functional metro system. I'm absolutely gobsmacked that they managed to build such a successful system, which has underground areas, and it's a really functional radial system, which almost everybody uses. So I have hopes.
Great. Well, that's very encouraging. And it's also encouraging to see an office behind you. I'm seeing more people I interview now actually working in their offices, which is a great news. And hopefully more and more of us will get back to our offices in the near future. Thank you very much, Sowmya.
Thank you very much, Peter.